Hello to my Greek friends. Usually I tend to be an optimist, looking at the bright side of life and of things, but to be honest, I am deeply concerned. I believe that Europe is really at a defining moment of its history. The way we respond to the current crisis, which by far is not limited to the Greek crisis, will really determine to a large extent the ability for Europeans to shape their future and to mean something not just for Europeans, but on the rest of the world. This is really a moment where we need to decide. To decide what? Well, to decide whether we want to go forward or backward. You might find this a bit simplistic, but it's not. It's not. We've decided to make a monetary union with 17 member states. And historically, there's no monetary union that can be successful or that has been successful without a fiscal and therefore a political union. And so now we must decide. Everyone realizes that the more we delay decisions, the deeper Europe gets into the crisis. And that means deciding whether we want to take a step back towards disintegration of the Eurozone, basically going back to the member state level, and that would clearly mean the beginning of the disintegration of the European Union, or conversely, to say, okay, we recognize the limits of the monetary union without a fiscal and political union, and hence we are going to build those fiscal and hence political unions. Is this what we want to do? Because let's be clear, any step in between will not be enough. When we look at the fundamentals of the European Union in terms of current account balance, so basically our trade balance between us and the rest of the world, we are pretty balanced actually. It's more or less in balance. If we look at our debt, the overall debt level of the Eurozone is 86-something% of GDP. It's not a nice figure, but it is still something that we can manage, especially as our debt is owned by our citizens. If you look at it from the Greek perspective, you might say, okay, well, but a large chunk of the Greek debt is owned by non-Greek citizens and institutions. That's true. Same thing goes for Belgium. Same thing goes for Italy and Spain, etc. But when we look at this from the Eurozone perspective, most of our debt is owned by Eurozone players, individuals or companies. So that makes us quite safe, as long as we can stimulate the confidence, the trust of the players, of the citizens versus one another, the trust of states versus one another, the trust of companies in the future of their own states and their own economies. And that's this lack of trust that we need to remedy. But the only way to remedy it is by providing credible answers. And by credible, I mean answers that go to the root of the issues that we are facing. So what are they? Well, first, in the case of Greece, let's face the simple fact that from the outset we knew that the level of debt in Greece is such that Greece will never be able to reimburse 100% of its debt. That's fact of life. And if we don't recognize a fact of life, then this destroys trust. So let's recognize that Greece will have to restructure and probably default on, say, 40–50% of its debt. That's a fact. It is not a pleasant exercise to do. But those who say, well, by the way, we should take the opportunity of such a default to have Greece outside of the euro are mistaken themselves. Because, come on, the rest of the debt would still be denominated in euros. And if Greece gets out of the euro, the drachma versus euro exchange rate will make that the debt will immediately come back to its current level. After restructuring half of it, well, the drachma will be so devalued that actually the rest of the debt will still be 100% of what it is today. So this is a non-starter. We have to keep Greece inside the euro. But restructuring only creates conditions. It creates conditions for then a sustainable change journey for Greece and for Europe. What do we mean by that? Well, we know that Greece has some homework to do. We know that the Greek state has been living beyond its means. Think of military spending, think of the level of civil servants in the country. This is unsustainable. So we know that we will need Greece to match its expenditures with its revenue. And so we have to work on both sides. Currently, and this is a problem of course, most of the effort has been on the expenditure side. And by the way, some taboos have not been broken. I have not seen that the military taboo has been broken. I have not seen the defense spending being hit. I have not seen these taboos to be tackled on the expenditure side. But by the way, what about the income side? Did we see the taboo of the richest in Greece really contributing their fair share into the effort? I didn't see that. So what about the richest Greeks contributing? What about those 200 billion Greek assets that are in Swiss banks? Is that something that we can support, that we can accept? By far no. And what about the second taboo of Greek politics, of the church, the first landowner in the country? What is the contribution of the Greek church to solving the problems of Greece? I tend to say, as a Christian, I mean, the first duty of a Christian is solidarity. Well, I'd like the Greek church to show solidarity to its own people and not just to its own institution. This is something that we need to see. So we need indeed significant efforts to be made in Greece, but on a socially balanced way, in a socially just way. I know that every Greek citizen knows that there are some deep problems inside Greece. And I'm sure that every Greek citizen is prepared to do his or her part in solving these issues. But you can only ask people to do their part if everyone is conscious that everyone is contributing his fair share. So we will see Greeks stepping up to the effort if all Greeks are convinced that all Greeks will contribute. And this is what we are still not seeing in Greece. We are still not seeing that the effort will be equally, well, not equally, but shared in a fair way. That is, that the richest will contribute more than an average part of the effort. This is what we need to see. However, this is not the end of the story. We keep saying that austerity or even sustainable public finances is not the end of all things. It's a precondition. But let's face it, Greece's economy needs a deep overhaul. And by the way, we should not single out Greece. Where is the ability of many of our economies, of our national economies, to create value, to really provide goods and services that increase the quality of life of everyone? Greece is not alone in having problems with that. When I look at economies, at part of economies of Spain, of Italy, of Portugal, of my own country, Belgium, where's our ability to innovate? Where's our ability to create value? Not just to follow on the bandwagon of other innovators, but to innovate ourselves. I think that most of Europe has a key role to play here, and that's a transformation that most of the European countries have to do. And to be honest, it's true that economies such as the German economy, to a lesser extent the Finnish economy, are showing examples. Yes, they are able to create more value, to out-innovate others, to basically defend their own on the global marketplaces. And I believe that if there's one lesson to be learned from their experience, is that indeed we have to climb up the innovation scale. This is something that we all need to do. Now, is it easy to do? No, absolutely not. Is it something that requires sustained effort? Absolutely. A Green New Deal can bring Greece there, can bring Portugal there, can bring Belgium there, can bring other countries there, but this is something that will last at least a generation. And here we come to what needs to be done in order to enable that. That means that Europe must be able to create the conditions for those countries, including Greece, to transform themselves. And that means basically lending to Greece to bridge the gap, but for the duration it needs. That means lending to Greece at low rates and for 20, 30 years, because that only will create the conditions for Greece to engage into its transformation. That's a sustained effort. This is, again, not something that you can do overnight. And that's certainly not something that austerity alone will guarantee. Again, we need balanced public finances, but public finances are an instrument for social justice, an instrument for creating innovation in the country. But of course, what we need to mobilize is the private sector in Greece, are the citizens, entrepreneurs, companies that actually can transform Greece. And again, they will not invest, they will not really put their money and effort into Greece if they do not see a climate that is conducive to trust. And again, the greatest value that Europe can do is create that trust towards Greece. Now, if I take a step back and take a helicopter view of Europe, in order for us to be able to do that, well, we need common instruments. And let's face it, Europe has been from the outset what Germans call a Transferunion. That indeed, from the beginning, some member states are contributing more than they get, and some member states get more than they contribute. There's a form of solidarity already. But again, we need to upgrade that. And indeed, with solidarity comes responsibility. We need to borrow together, and that means taking bonds together, borrowing money on the markets as one, to be considered as a Eurozone with one signature, not 17. One signature, that's Eurobonds. But you cannot do that without having a strong common economic governance. In other terms, if we take Eurobonds, that means that every single citizen of the Eurozone takes a risk for the common good of all of us. But then we have to manage that risk and to be sure that indeed a country such as Greece, but there are other examples again, don't fall into the sort of free riding that we have seen. Basically make themselves unsustainable at the expense of everyone else. And that means that we need a strong economic governance, which is no longer, I'm afraid to say, coordination, but it's more integration. Well, we have seen what coordination brings. I mean, coordination means agreeing among 17 or 27 to do the same thing. Well, you know how long it takes and how difficult it is to agree among 27. That is why we need, for both operational reasons but also credibility reasons, to move towards a more integrated approach. And that means indeed delegating some sovereignty, some powers to the European level. And what am I thinking of? Well, of course, Eurobonds, issuing Eurobonds is one thing. Ensuring a certain level of control over budgets of member states in order to make sure that they remain sustainable. But also, if we want to enable that, well, gradually harmonize the income side of the budgetary equation. We have devoted very much time and energy in the Stability and Growth Pact on the expenditure side, but now we have to look at the income side. How do we make sure that large corporations, that the financial sector, that energy corporations do contribute their fair share to the budgets of the member states and of the European Union? If we want to do that, there's no substitute for common action. I mean, every single member state will be faced with the tax competition from its neighbors, and believe me, the corporations are experts at taking advantage of that, ending up paying little or no taxation at all. So this is something that we need to remedy, and that means more tax harmonization, not just on the tax base, but also on the tax rates like we do for the VAT. So this is crucial, but as the American revolutionaries said, no taxation without representation. And that means, and that's probably one of the most crucial things that we need to enable, we cannot have a more integrated Europe in fiscal terms without a very strong democratic basis. Those decisions about the major policy orientations, about taxation, are decisions that need to be voted by at least a parliament. We cannot just leave that to a European Commission that would operate more or less disconnected from representation from the citizens. And this is why this democratic articulation will be one of the toughest nuts to crack to enable, well, elected people to really control the economic choices and the functioning of the European Union. But that means that we need the trust of our citizens that indeed we are going to do that properly. And this is part of this rebuilding of trust exercise that we need to do. So let's face it, we need to move away from a loosely coordinated monetary union towards a really integrated union, politically, economically, monetarily, fiscally. That's what we need to do. And we need to make the point to our citizens that indeed this is a price to pay if we want to seize again and to get again the ability as Europeans, as citizens, to shape our future. Because believe me, if we do not stand up to the challenge, our future will exist. The only difference is that it will be shaped by events beyond our control and by countries beyond our control. If we want to regain control over our own destiny, then the only way is forward towards more integration. And those who say, well, we should rather retreat to our national scenes, I just challenge them. How will Finland, how will Belgium, how will Flanders in Belgium retain the ability to shape its future when it represents what? Even a fraction of a percentage of the global population? How long will Germany or Finland survive economically in an economic desert in Europe? This will simply not be. So the only way is forward, but then we have to make the point to our citizens and to show them the way. And this is indeed not an easy way. That means that all Europeans have to roll up their sleeves and to start building their futures. And indeed in Europe we tended to take many things for granted. Now we realize that in a globalized world facing the challenges of global poverty, of global warming, of global imbalances, of global financial industry that is killing us, well, facing those challenges requires work, requires investment, and in a sustained way. This is basically our value proposition to the citizen. I believe it's the most credible one in town, but then we have to get out and make the point to our citizens. So that's what I encourage you to do. I'm sure that the Greek citizens are waiting for you to tell them those truths. So really, I wish you all the best doing that, and well, looking forward to work with you in the coming months and years on that.
Kalimera, guten Tag. Well, it's a pleasure to speak to you during your party conference. I was twice in Greece since the crisis broke out, and I must say I'm proud of being part of the European Green Party, and I felt very close to you, closer than to any other people here in the Parliament from Greece politically, that's clear. And it's a pity that I cannot make it this weekend and this Friday to be with you, but I had other obligations in Germany for a long time. Well, the situation is very serious at the moment. I think it's obvious that not only Greece is in a big problem, but the Eurozone as a whole is in a big problem. So even if the economic situation at the moment in Germany seems to be very favorable, everybody in Europe is taking larger and larger risks in order to stabilize the European economy. And some countries really suffer, one of which is of course Greece, by increasing poverty, increasing unemployment, a shrinking economy, causing more and more economic problems. And we all suffer from an unstable banking system which is putting all the countries under danger of default. In the end, we are all in a common problem with a dysfunctional economic structure in the Eurozone. So the big question is what to do now. And I think it's important to be honest and say there is no easy way out anymore. There is no cheap way out anymore. I think the people of Greece know this. I think there are many people in Europe who have not understood that yet. They still think that some countries, also Germany or the Netherlands or Finland, can go it alone. I think nobody can go it alone anymore. The key message is either we learn to harmonize the way how we do economic policy in the different countries, or the euro will fail. And this is not only a problem of the so-called periphery, it's also a problem of the economic core. Obviously, it's clear some countries live beyond their means. They imported a lot of capital, thought they can indebt themselves, mainly the private sector, but also the public sector, and still work under the same Eurozone and currency as everybody else. On the other hand, we had some countries who thought, well, we specialize in cheating others with low tax rates, like Luxembourg, like Austria, like Ireland and others. There were other countries like the Netherlands and Germany who thought, well, now with a common currency, we can try to export enormously and get more market share, and basically harming the industry in different parts of the Eurozone. So by restricting wages and restricting public spending. And we have, of course, also some countries more outside of the Eurozone, such as the United Kingdom, but you also find that in other countries where we thought, well, great, we have an integrated capital market, so do not regulate properly the financial industry so that your financial place, your financial center can profit from the common zone. And I think all these strategies cannot work anymore. Either we learn that all the countries have to make their shifts, or the euro will not be able to stick together. And this means the richer part, so the surplus countries such as the Netherlands and Germany, we have to import more, we have to increase our demand in the sense of a Green New Deal, so increasing wages, in particular for the lower wage ranges. We have to increase investment into the future, such as education and the fight against climate change, and by that increasing our imports. On the other hand, I think it's also part of an honest balance. Greece and also Portugal, Spain, they will have to become more competitive. They will have also to cut costs, and I know that this is a tough message. But if the countries want to stay in the euro, and I think they should stay in the euro, and the euro has to stick together, then also the southern states mainly have to learn to become more competitive. And even if this is a problem, of course, but it has to be done, and that's the big difference, what I see with the PASOK government at the moment in Greece, that they have done it, they call themselves socialists, but they've put the costs of adaptation to the poor, to also people who earn low incomes. They have not ensured that the rich pay taxes, and they have not made a fair burden sharing of the necessary adaptation in Greece. And we have a very similar balance in Spain and Portugal, where also the strategies of adaptation are socially totally unjust. Well, and I think we have to crack down on tax havens. We cannot allow Switzerland, Luxembourg, Ireland and Austria and others to indulge on tax competition, and by this way reduce the capacity of all the member states to balance their public budgets. And lastly, we have to be hard and tough on the banks. The banks are the main reason why at the moment it's so difficult to cut the Greek debt. The main reason is that we fear that not only the Greek banking system, but also the banking system in other parts of Europe will be harmed. Because obviously if we cut the Greek debt, then the immediate question will be, will the Portuguese, will the Irish, will the Spanish still pay their debt? So therefore it's important that we all support the rescue mechanisms on the European level to stabilize the banking system. But if public money has to be used again to stabilize the banking system, then we have to take public control over the banks. It's not acceptable again to give blank checks, which give then the banking system the possibility to continue with their speculative business models. They have to continue lending to the real economy, and they have to limit the unethical short-termist behavior with high bonuses, high dividends. They have to be accountable to citizens, and this means that if public money is used, the public should and the state should act as any other private investor as well. This means to demand control over the company for which you provide capital, and then use this control in order to hold banks accountable. And obviously I don't want to be misunderstood. As soon as we have the rescue mechanism on the European level in place, the Greek debt has to be cut. It is not sustainable. It has to be cut, I guess, by an amount of about 60%. And it's very, very pitiful, of course, that a lot of that is now not anymore in the hand of private actors, but in the hand of the ECB and many other public actors. This is very bitter, but it is a matter of fact. And lastly, I think there's no way out of the crisis if we only have austerity measures in the southern countries. The southern countries need urgently, first, a reduction